This, in terms of undergraduates, this course is limited to persons who have had a, what is it? Just read it. A course in Buddhist studies above the 100 level. Class attendance is an absolute requirement here because the course moves not so much by the reading, but by the discussion that we have here. And because so little is known about Tantra, it's not as if all of you have had background courses in Tantra and a whole lot of courses in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism and so forth. This is not just some sort of research seminar in which each person goes off and does their own thing and then comes back and reports on it. That there's a great deal of I wouldn't want to call it just learning of information. What would you call it from previous seminar?
Interaction.
Yeah, a lot of interaction in which you ingest, which you play with perspectives and so forth. Does that make sense? You were there. What would you say?
I'd say becoming familiar with a certain amount of material, trying to do it as thoroughly as we can.
Now, what is this? This, I've done 2 books on the difference between Sutra and Tantra. One is item number 3 under reading, Tantra in Tibet. The Dalai Lama in 1972 asked me if I would translate a large work by Tsongkhapa, the name just before his name and number 3, on the Tantric systems. And I burst out laughing, really, right in front of him. This is an audience of the Dalai Lama. I said, oh, that's impossible. And so that was that. And but I went back to my place and thought about it and thought, well, if he's asking me to do this and thinks maybe I can do it, maybe in time I could, and maybe some purpose to it. So when I saw him in my next audience, I said, well, that's all right, I'll do it. And Tantra in Tibet is the first chapter, nearly the first chapter, a tiny portion of the book. And he gave me his commentary. So that's why it's listed as having 3 authors. It's Tsongkhapa's text on the difference between the 2 types of Buddha's word. If we took Buddha's word, we can break it down into Sutra and Tantra. And that text is concerned with what is Tantra as distinguished to Sutra. Trying to find in this case by Tsongkhapa, he's looking for the central distinguishing feature. Whereas people prior to him looked for a whole panoply of features. And so he came in, historically, he came into a situation in which a whole panoply had already been identified, and he was looking for the central one. And he was also arguing down a lot of what other people had said was the difference between Sutra and Tantra. It's a bit, really, I don't want to make it, I don't want to skew it, but, like you have Freudian psychoanalysis and Jungian psychoanalysis, just what is the difference? Not only what is the difference, but why is Jungian, let's say, superior to Freudian? Or why is Freudian superior to Jungian? So they're concerned not only with the difference, but also with why it's superior. So there's a hierarchical element to it also, and a my side, your side element. And then I wrote a little bit in the back of that book. So Tsongkhapa lived from 1357 to 1419 at a time when Tibetans had already cataloged the various ways in which Indian scholars differentiated between Sutra and Tantra. It was already done by one of his close predecessors. And so faced with this situation, he critically examined this material to find out what he thought was the central distinguishing feature between Sutra and Tantra. He came up with deity yoga as the distinguishing feature. When you read his book, it's actually quite difficult to find out that that's what he found out. But I've translated in such a way that it's completely obvious, named chapters and so forth. But it was very interesting when I was first studying, you're swimming around trying to figure it out, because he goes through an elaborate argument, eliminating this and eliminating that and eliminating this. And when he finally gets to it, you're so confused that it's like the confusion is more rested with you than the solution. But what a good teacher, and meaning a good Tibetan teacher, does is tell you beforehand what the difference is, so that you put it in mind and you have some, you have a way of not getting lost.
Who was the predecessor?
The predecessor is Pudun, and his text I've done a rough translation of, and it is in this packet. One of the things in the packet, just a rough translation. His dates are, he just a little bit predates Tsongkhapa in the 14th century. Now, so the Dalai Lama, my deal with the Dalai Lama was I would do things that he asked me to do if he would answer any questions that I had on them. That's how I gained access. And he was more than willing. And so I had tremendous access. It was just terrific. And on this particular one, I just put a tape recorder down, and he taught me this part of the text. And in Tibetan, and I translated it and edited it and turned it into the introduction to Tsongkhapa's text, because his teaching was more lucid than Tsongkhapa's text. And then I added a few things on at the end, and that's why it's listed as having 3 authors. It was first published in England. Then I felt that Tsongkhapa's argument was not clear, or the steps of it could be made clearer. Not that I was bringing anything new to them. And that's what's in the Tantric distinction, item number 4, in the second part. The second part presents the central features, important features of his argument. Now, in order to do Tantra in Tibet, item number 3, I did a lot of research into what Tsongkhapa had before him, including his predecessor Pudun, and what some of the people after him, how they responded. And I just sort of, that was in the back of my mind as I did things, but I did not present the work as a whole panoply of opinions on the difference between Sutra and Tantra, but rather stuck to Tsongkhapa's story. So I'm in process of doing another book on this same topic, book number 3, Can the World Stand It? Which is this, in extremely rough form. Please bear with it. It's in rough form. Pudun's translation, you know, the part on Tsongkhapa probably is quite clear. The part on Pudun has nothing but a rough translation. The part on Longchenpa, also one of Tsongkhapa's predecessors, is even rougher. It's all right. It suit our purpose as well, I think. And then I've had a lot of concern with Jung's warnings against inflation and his warnings against identifying with a deity in yoga. And because really I got into this field in college through my interest in Freud and Jung, really. And except for one article I've never written on it, but it's really where I'm coming from. So, at my ripe old age, it's time I wrote something about it. So in first one of the first parts in this text, is some material trying to face Jung's challenges and seeing if there are any answers or suggestions of practices that would counter the ills of inflation within the Buddhist practices. So, and then Pudun, and then another part of, let's see, then item number 2 here, Deity Yoga, is the next section of Tsongkhapa's work. It's the next 2 sections. The sections on action and performance Tantra. Tsongkhapa's tradition and others, but not all others, divide Tantras into 4 classes: action, performance, yoga, and highest yoga or unexcelled yoga. And Tsongkhapa's text, you see, has a general intro on the difference between Sutra and Tantra. And you see that's, right, text number 3. And then his sections on action and performance Tantra are text number 2. And again, the Dalai Lama taught me these privately. I recorded them, translated his teaching, edited his teaching, and added a little bit myself, and did a whole lot of reading around also. That's really way in the background of that book. So in Tantric techniques, item number 1, I also present, like in English that is not translation English. I hope it's not translation English. I've done so much translation that I probably talk like a, you know, in wooden translation-ese. That's what's here. Now I've also done the section on Yoga Tantra, which is not in here, hasn't been published yet. And really haven't done anything on this presentation of highest yoga tantra. I've done others. Then, so this is really too much detail in one day. But yeah, item number 4 in the reading, remember the second half of it is just another rendition of Tantra in Tibet. The first half of it gives a background on important basic Buddhist practices. very good to read, to get background, and even for those who are well acquainted with Tibetan Buddhism, something to read. Someone edited this, Anne Klein edited this from lectures that I gave. I myself can't stand to read it because I don't write in that voice, but it's been more popular than anything I've ever published. Then kindness, clarity, and insight is a good intro also to various topics within Tibetan Buddhism, and we're specifically using it for, if you notice in the background reading under principal topics, pages 118 to 156, the three principal aspects of the path. For those of you who have had that course with me, this will refresh the main topics of that course. Those who haven't had the course, it'll supply a good bit of that course. Now that kindness, clarity, and insight is comprised by the Dalai Lama's lectures when he came to the United States in 1979, and I believe in Canada in 1980. He was first allowed into the United States in 1979, and I say allowed because the Chinese communists would always complain and say he should not be allowed in, we'll make a big fuss if you let him in, and literally kept him out of the country until 1979. And it was through a friend of mine who was working in Carter's White House that the Dalai Lama got to come. And I happened to be present. My friend took me into the meeting in the White House. There were only the two of us. He needed somebody with him. You know, you always need somebody with you who just sort of goes, yeah, yeah. I had one sentence. I forget what it was. And at that time, the National Security Advisor was Zbigniew Brzezinski. I remember we were in the waiting room just outside the Oval Office, and there's a little passageway, and these little offices for these people with great power, because the White House isn't big. These little offices where they reside. It's a waiting room. Brzezinski came out to look at me, because he's a professor, came out to look at me, and to me it was like looking in a TV set. Yeah, because I had only seen him on TV before. It's really weird, you know? You first meet these guys. He's only been on TV. And my friend was good friends with Carter's chief of staff. And it's by such personal connections things often get done. And I said, oh yeah, now he can come in now, but not for 6 months. Well, you couldn't prepare a trip within 6 months anyway. But the Chinese Communist government still objects all around the world whenever they hear that he's going to go anywhere. So when the Dalai Lama finally met with a president of the United States, he met with George Bush in the private quarters, not in the Oval Office. When he met with Bill Clinton, it was in Al Gore's office. And Clinton happened to drop by while the Dalai Lama was there. Oh, unofficial. It's so wimpy. So anyway, it's somewhat appropriate in that the Dalai Lama is going to be in Washington giving a talk at Constitution Hall on the 13th. In connection with which, I'm going to be testifying before the Subcommittee on Asian and Pacific Affairs of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on the 7th. So we will not have a meeting on the 7th.
Week from today.
Week from today. At the committee meeting, Harrison Ford is the draw. I've done 3 of these before. This is the 4th. fourth time I've done this sort of thing. So I know the routine. And, they're very important. But, you have a draw, and the draw speaks either first or second, and all the TV's there and the bright lights and everything. By the time I speak, TV's gone, bright lights have gone. There's one senator left, maybe two, out of the whole committee. Because Harrison Ford will have left. How long can they spend? He will have left by 10 o'clock. And I'll be speaking at 11:30 or something. But still, it goes into the record. You might look on C-SPAN that day. Once Harrison Ford's on it, maybe at least that part of it they'd put on C-SPAN, and then they'd say, "Oh, we've got to switch over to the the Ag Committee on whatever." As it stands now, I'm going to be speaking about the Panchen Lama and his importance in the Tibetan scene, and the fact that the Chinese Communist government is trying to interfere in the process of the recognition of the reincarnation of a Lama. A communist, materialistic government is trying to have a place in the recognition of a reincarnation. It's just mind-boggling, isn't it? It's lovely. Okay. Then, there are other items of reading which I'll put on reserve. Kukai, Japanese, on the same topic. You see exoteric, this is Sutra, esoteric is Tantra. I'm always suspicious when somebody calls their teaching esoteric. It's like if you can get away with it, it's good. Hans Küng, you may be aware of Thomas, right? Thomas Kuhn's work on paradigm change, how historically, in his case, it's within science, views change. The commonplace view being that in science, things change gradually through increments of information. Everybody is super rational, and things just rationally work their way out in advance. And he discovered it don't work that way at all. That people cling to the old model, other people jump to the new model, right? There's tremendous tension that during the period of the old model, contrary evidence is being denied, unnoticed. And then some people begin noticing that evidence and bringing it to the fore, and that things don't proceed in a neat, rational way. And I found this particularly interesting more in an autobiographical way, just my own life, in my own perspectives on Sutra and Tantra. And I haven't written my part of the story into this yet, but I think I have to just write my own story, because I'm sort of hiding under a discussion of, that is Hans Küng's adaptation of this theory to theology, how perspectives change in theology. I'm adapting it in the sense of how an individual would move from the Sutra paradigm to the Tantra paradigm, if you've really done the Sutra paradigm. But that, I admit, comes out of my own biography. So, in terms of the topics, Topic number 5, I'm not sure whether we'll get to it or not. Very interesting topic, but it's got to have the background of the other topics. If we get to it, we do. If we don't, we don't. What else?
Did you say already the reading assignment?
Reading assignment for next time, yes. Reading assignment for next time should be that kindness, clarity, and insight, 118 to 156. That's all. My reading assignments tend to be short, but please read it early and think about it. Let's talk a little bit about it. Class goes to 1:45, right? I try each time to give a little intro to the next class. It makes the reading easier. In the 11th century, an Indian scholar from Bengal, a Bengali scholar, came to Tibet, and around the middle of the century taught in central Tibet. Very interesting to go to his little temple, because it was really little. And the man had tremendous influence in Tibet. All of the sects within Tibet respect him highly. And it's just interesting to see how much can be done from a little place. Anyway, when he was in Western Tibet, he wrote a text called Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And in it, he laid out, how many people have had my Buddhist Studies 317 or sat in on it? You have not sat in on it? You sat in it once. That's good. And as was common with many Indians who came to Tibet and many Tibetans, they tried to distill the essence of a vast amount of practices into usable rubrics. And the rubric that he used was, as it says here, 3 types of beings. It means 3 levels of beings. And he's talking about the spiritual capacity of beings. And typical to these layouts of capacity, they have very pedestrian names: small, middling, and great. Okay? There's also a section on this in, no, I haven't made that available to you. Sorry. And it's a matter of distinguishing the attitudes of these 3 types of beings. And his, ministerial function was like calling on his audience to recognize where they are in terms of these 3 levels, and to cause them to aspire to the great. Now, it of course wouldn't work unless you identified yourself as the small, unless it was clear enough, that left something for you to aspire to. And so the small, even, I'm not sure he did, but at least later people did, both earlier and later. They divided it into small, middling small, and great small, great and small. The others don't get this division. Now, the small of the small are beings who are concerned only with the affairs of this lifetime. No concern for future lifetimes. And use merely worldly means, making money, putting down your neighbors, putting down your enemies, putting up your friends. I wonder why I said putting down your neighbors. Things like that. People of middling small capacity use religious and non-religious means in order to better themselves only in this lifetime. In other words, the perspective is short. The perspective is only of something that could last as long as this lifetime. So even if they're using religious means, right? I used to live in a monastery in New Jersey, lived there for 5 years. People would come in and, my room was right by the temple, and people making it the name. They're giving names of Buddhas. And they're seeking for, they're contractors, and they're seeking to win contracts. So you see, they're using religious means with the aims of just getting something, not even much later on in this lifetime, but short-term goals. We do a lot of this, don't we? It's the business person's yoga, right? So that you can play the stock market better or something like that. Then the great of the small, are those who mainly use religious means with a perspective that goes from lifetime to lifetime. And that means that they're concerned with something that's sufficiently deep that it can go from lifetime to lifetime. And so that doesn't mean your house or your friends or your body or, you're dealing with some deep level of mind. It doesn't mean you're necessarily manifesting a deep level of mind, but you're concerned with something that has an impact long term. The middling are those who, so this is the line of religion. Everything beneath it is secular. And there are suitable words in both Sanskrit and Tibetan for religion and secular. I don't think it's just superimposed from some other culture. Atiśa, there's a story that he was asked, but what about if you use religious means for just the affairs of this lifetime? What happens to you in the next lifetime? And at least it's said, now this is, 9 centuries ago? It's 1050 or so. He said, you'll go to hell. Sounds like, But his point is that we're talking about karma, right? Deeds. And you're aiming for their fruition all within this lifetime. So all the good force of it is going to be used up in this lifetime. What's going to be left for the next lifetime? Most likely, cruddy stuff. That's his point. So you see, the fruition of karma has a lot to do with motivation. So the religious line, so that means the bottom level of religion does not have to involve getting out of the realm of cyclic existence, getting liberation, but of getting a good life at minimum of getting a good life within cyclic existence. That's the bottom line of religion. Religion doesn't have to be entirely otherworldly. But people on the middling level are seeking to get out of cyclic existence entirely, having seen that we're not going to have anything to talk about next time. Having seen that if you're born in a good situation, you know, even for 5 lifetimes, eventually you can be reborn in a lousy situation, that there's no definiteness. So you should get out of the process entirely. And then those at the great level infer, based on knowledge of their own situation of suffering, the suffering of those who are close to them, and mainly seek to help others, which means oneself is going to have to get out of the mess. But the prime motivation throughout it is to help others. It doesn't mean you no longer seek to get out of cyclic existence yourself. You certainly seek to get out of cyclic existence yourself. Not only that, you also seek to attain the omniscience of Buddhahood so that you can be of more service to others. The problem with helping others so often is not knowing enough in order to be able to help, right? So they seek a high level of enlightenment, even higher than liberation from cyclic existence. There being 2 levels of enlightenment, 2 levels of liberation. 1 liberation from cyclic existence, and 1 Buddhahood, which there's also omniscience. In which, if you're omniscience, then you know all techniques to help everybody. And you know everybody, inside and out. And you can match techniques. Not as if you have to think, oh, this person has, you know, and go through it. And boing, that's the right technique. At that point, supposedly, it's done spontaneously. The need of the person meeting with the capacity of the enlightened being. So those are the beings of 3 capacities. And it's a way of, it structures a worldview. Where do I place myself? Most of the time, small of a small. Some of the time, not too much time, middling of a small. And sometimes I have, wishes for the other. But my life, for the most part, is mired in the small of the small. But it like sets out what would be, not just what would be preferable, give me a word, not just the ideal either, because it impinges on you, it affects how you behave. For instance, you see, the great of the great are so tremendously influenced by compassion, right? So you find, say, amongst Tibetan people, that in the monastery where I used to live, the monks would come up, if there was a fly on the table, they'd come up behind the fly and scoop it up in the hand and take it out the window and let it out the window. Yeah, I think incredible, why don't you kill it? Get a fly swatter, get a, spread. But this is how it affects, you see? It's not just ideal. It's not just normative, what's called normative religion, as if this was somewhere over there that didn't impinge on people and affect their behavior. It really affects your behavior. Nowadays, what people also do, I saw in India with amongst Tibetan, is you can take a plastic bag, a bread bag. For some reason, flies don't see it. When you come up behind them, they know you're coming at a certain point. Come from the front, there's no hope. From the back, if you're quick enough, you can eventually get them. Amen? But with a plastic bag, for some reason, you can just put it down over the top of the fly. Now, the fly goes up inside the bag, and then you can close off the bottom of it, and you can even get 10 or so flies. And people take them over to the door, and then let them out. Hey, you notice, gee, you don't have a screen on your window. I mean, that, to me, that's truly affecting behavior. With flies, I mean, give me a break, it really is. I mean, all the better if it affects, at least from my point of view, with humans, but that's getting down to a pretty raw level of experience. How you deal with little creatures. And it has, I think, a lot to do with this map, this what? What words would you use for?
Spectrum? Spectrum of motivations? Vision of possibilities.
Vision of possibilities. That's interesting. It's an inculcation of attitude.
Range?
Well, I mean, but the ideal. If you look, I mean, let's completely trite example. You look at advertisements on TV. The ideal is to consume and gain, certain status or have certain people who care for you in certain, great sex and a lot of food, whatever it is. And that's inculcation. Role. Give me words. Yes.
I don't have any words, but with like advertisements, the ideal is being inculcated
Yes.
because it's on an egoic level. So it's really being implanted into your consciousness.
Yes.
Not from it has. There's nothing within that it represents being pushed within your consciousness, as opposed to this where it's really addressing something that already exists within. So I wouldn't really say that this was an inculcation as much as it is inspiration.
Inspiration. The crud that is being appealed to by advertisements is already within. But what you're talking about is within in some sort of in a different sense.
Okay, yeah, it's already within, but it's within, only within this lifetime. Not within that we have on the egoic level
I
was
see.
developed
Oh.
during this lifetime. And
I
so
see.
it's,
Yes.
I don't,
Yes, an appeal is being made to something very deep from the very start.
yeah, I guess I
Yeah.
pretty much summarized it.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. Huh. Then, well, let's leave it at that. There are three principal aspects of the path, of which you'll be reading about, and try to figure out how the three principal aspects of the path fit in with the three types of beings. Which, to be great at the small, which of the three principal aspects of the path you need, middling, what do you need, great, what do you need, okay? Now, other inquiries about the course. Paper requirement, well, as it says there, 20 to 40 pages. There's an absolute maximum of 40. I won't read over 40. It has to be double spaced, it has to be tight. Footnotes at the bottom page, bibliography. And the paper is more based on the material of the course than a research paper. It'll grow out from within the course rather than doing the course and then doing something else. And that's probably true both for undergraduates and graduate students. Graduate students may be adding some other, may have a dual element there. I may figure out something, but with me it always, I don't know beforehand where things are going.
Will there be an assigned topic? Or is it going to be forced to do something related to the course?
No final exam, probably a midterm exam, or sometime to get vocabulary, to make sure you know all the vocabulary. Great, middling, small. Great at the small, middling, the small, small, the small, things like this. Buddhist words, Sutra and Tantra, just things that make dealing with a lot easier. And if they we'll print this out for you if there are not enough over there, but I think we've got enough. Okay, and if there's anyone who doesn't have a Buddhist studies course over the 100 level and who wants to make a case to me, please do so now.